Wow. You really weren't kidding about the amount of material we have for this deep dive into Nathan Medina's case.
Right.
Court documents, witness testimonies. We even have audio recordings.
It's a lot.
It is, but like you always say, that's what we're here for, right?
Absolutely. This case really highlights how important it is to look at every single piece of evidence.
To get the full picture.
Exactly, because each one represents a different perspective.
Right.
And when you start to piece those perspectives together, that's how we can really get a clearer picture of what might have happened.
Okay, so big picture, we're talking about Nathan Medina, who is currently in prison.
Yes.
Serving a life sentence for murder.
Right.
The murder of Joshua Rhoads.
That's right.
And he's always maintained his innocence.
He has. And you've given us some really incredible recordings to go through from Beverly Rhoads, who was central to this case.
Okay, so let's set the scene. March 20, 2008.
All right.
The murder takes place at Beverly Rhoads' house.
Right.
According to police reports, it's a home invasion, there's a confrontation, and then tragically Joshua Rhoads is killed. Now immediately Beverly Rhoads says she knows who did it. Nathan Medina.
It seems pretty straightforward, right?
You would think so.
Yeah.
You would think that would be it. Case closed.
But you know, we always say on the show, we really have to look at all the evidence. And when we listen to what Beverly Rhoads actually said that day, it's a different story.
Okay.
So in this police interview, she states multiple times that the intruder was masked.
Really?
Yeah. She even demonstrates for them how the mask covered the intruder's face. Let's listen. Audio clip plays content from audio clips not included in this text-based response.
She very clearly states that the intruder had a mask on. That completely contradicts her later testimony in court when she claims she saw Nathan clearly and that he wasn't wearing a mask at all.
Right.
So how could her story change so drastically?
That's a great question. I mean, that's what we need to find out.
Yeah.
This really casts a huge shadow of doubt over her entire eyewitness account because it was her word against his. And what makes it even more strange is that Nathan's own lawyer, they didn't even challenge her on this during the trial.
You're right. That's a pretty big omission.
It's a huge omission.
And on top of that, we also have Shawn Mandell and Longfellow, who were at Roadhouse that day as well.
Right. Their testimonies are interesting.
They are.
Because they seem to change a bit over time, especially Mandell's. So initially he tells police he doesn't think Nathan's the shooter. He even suggests that maybe the police should ask Rhoads and Joshua if they recognize Nathan because he's like, I trust their judgment more than mine. He actually goes so far as to say that the intruder had a shriveled up face, like a meth addict.
And that description doesn't really match Nathan.
It doesn't match Nathan at all, not in the slightest.
Okay, so we have a questionable eyewitness ID and another witness who doesn't think Nathan was the shooter. What makes him change his mind?
Well, this is where the plot thickens. So there's this recorded conversation between Mandell and Detective McColgan.
Okay.
And in this conversation, McColgan basically tells Mandell that Rhoads has already positively identified Nathan as the shooter. So guess what happens?
Let me guess. Mandell is suddenly sure that it's Nathan.
You got it. So after that conversation, Mandell confidently picks Nathan out of a photo lineup.
Wait, so there's a recording of a potentially coached witness, and it never comes up in the trial.
That's right. Yeah, and it gets even more strange. So this wasn't the only time that Rhoads pointed the finger at Nathan for something without any real proof.
Go on.
So you'll remember there was that incident where a rock was thrown through her window.
Right.
She immediately told police that she knew it was Nathan.
Even though she didn't see who it was.
Even though she didn't actually see who it was. And to add another layer to this whole thing, there's this detail about a suspicious work van belonging to Shawn Mandell.
Shawn Mandell.
The same Shawn Mandell.
Whose story changed.
Right. It was seen near Nathan's home just a couple days before the murder.
And this was around the time that some things went missing from Nathan's house as well.
Exactly. Things that the prosecution later tried to claim were part of an arson kit that they found.
At Rhoads' house.
You got it.
Okay.
So it really seems like we're slowly kind of peeling back the layers here and things aren't adding up. We have a potential motive on Nathan's side because Beverly Rhoads had been suing his father.
Right.
But then at the same time, you have these instances where she's blaming him without any real proof. You have a witness whose story changes. You have this suppressed audio recording. It's like, what do we believe?
It's a lot to take in.
It's a lot.
And I think it's easy for us to maybe jump to conclusions, especially in a case like this where someone has been killed.
Absolutely.
But it's really important for us to stay objective and look at the facts that we have.
Yeah.
And the inconsistencies that we've talked about they really make you think twice
They do. They really do. You're right.
about what really happened that day.
It's easy to get caught up in a narrative, especially when we're talking about something as serious as this.
Right.
But like you said, we have to consider every possibility, every angle. And these inconsistencies really make you stop and think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So before we get into any of the lack of physical evidence that we have, let's take a closer look at those inconsistencies. What else did you find that just didn't seem to add up? Okay, so we've talked a lot about those witness accounts and how they don't really seem to line up. But what about actual physical evidence?
Right.
You would think with a murder charge, there would be something concrete.
Yeah. That's where this case gets even more interesting. So we have Beverly Rhoads, right?
Right.
Describing this intense struggle, she says that the intruder held her in a bear hug.
Right.
But get this. Nathan's clothes were never tested for pepper spray or blood.
Wait, are you serious?
Yeah?
She's claiming this violent close contact attack, and they didn't even bother to check his clothes.
Nope. And it's not like it wasn't on their radar, because in your notes you point out that even though Rhoads insisted the intruder wasn't wearing gloves, they only tested Nathan's hands for gunshot residue.
Huh.
They didn't test them for blood or any trace of pepper spray.
So speaking of gunshot residue, that was something the prosecution brought up, right?
Right.
They said they found it on his jacket.
They did. They claim that they found trace amounts, like 3 parts per million on the sleeves of a jacket that they got from Nathan's house.
Okay.
But you dug into the forensic details on that one.
Yeah.
And experts say that a level that low, it's more likely from contamination than it is from someone who actually fired a weapon, especially multiple times.
So even the physical evidence they presented isn't as clear-cut as they made it seem.
Exactly.
It's like the more we learn about this case, the more questions we have.
Yeah.
What about the arson kit they kept mentioning?
That's another dead end, because your research very clearly showed that there were no fingerprints or DNA on any of those items that linked them back to Nathan.
It's like they were so focused on this revenge narrative
Right.
that they just kind of ignored all these other details that didn't fit.
It's certainly possible, which, again, brings up questions about the investigation, the prosecution. And actually, there are even more inconsistencies with Beverly Rhoads' story, specifically what happened right after Joshua was shot.
Oh, really? What do you mean?
So she claims that after the intruder shot Joshua, he just forgets she's there.
He just leaves.
Yeah, she says he just leaves her in the laundry room. But when you think about it, she was on a corded phone
Right.
with 911
Right.
in a room with no other exits.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
It doesn't track.
So if we were to entertain this idea that maybe Rhoads was involved, like Nathan claims,
Right.
what was she hoping to accomplish?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
What was her motive? Because you're right, the prosecution, they presented this idea of revenge as her primary driving force.
Right.
But was it really that simple? Could there have been something else going on?
We're back to more questions than answers.
It seems like it.
It's clear there are inconsistencies in the witness testimonies. The physical evidence is shaky at best, and that suppressed recording is just, it's suspicious.
It's very suspicious.
It really is, and it makes you think twice about everything.
Right. And remember, we've really just scratched the surface here. I mean,
Yeah.
you provided so much information.
We did.
Court transcripts, police reports, expert analyses. It all adds to how complex this case really is.
This deep dive really feels like we're trying to put together this puzzle, but like half the pieces are missing.
Right.
And the other half might be from a completely different puzzle.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, this is about more than just a mystery.
That's right.
This is Nathan Medina's life.
A man's life is on the line.
His entire future hinges on what happened that night. And if he's telling the truth, then whoever actually did this is still out there.
Absolutely. And we haven't even gotten to the part about Nathan's parents.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were close with Beverly.
They were close with her.
They considered her a friend.
And because of how sensitive everything was, their lawyer advised them not to testify for Nathan.
Yeah, they were basically silenced.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
Because if she was willing to manipulate and deceive people
Right.
who she was supposedly close to,
Right.
what else was she capable of? So we spent all this time talking about how there are all these holes in the prosecution's case.
Right.
The witness accounts don't seem to really add up. The physical evidence is shaky at best.
Right.
But what if we take a step back? What are some of the other possibilities here? What are some of the alternate theories you found interesting?
Well, that's where it gets really, really interesting, because when you start to look at some of the alternate scenarios that you've uncovered, especially when you consider Beverly Rhoads' history, one of the most compelling involves this idea of insurance fraud.
Okay, so you're talking about that theory that she staged the whole thing.
Yeah,
The break-in, the shooting to get the insurance money from a fire,
exactly.
and then she was going to try to pin it all on Nathan.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty big claim.
It is a big claim, but I think when you look at everything we've talked about, it's not totally out of the realm of possibility. I mean, we know that she had a habit of blaming Nathan for things without any proof.
Right.
Her own financial history shows a pattern of manipulation.
Right. And she was under a lot of financial pressure at the time because of the construction project, the lawsuit with Nathan's dad.
Exactly. She had a motive.
Yeah.
And, the prosecution really focused on this revenge angle.
Right.
But what if there was something else going on? What if it was more about greed? What if she just saw this as a way to get herself out of debt and an opportunity to make Nathan take the fall?
But staging something like this,
No.
a murder, that's incredibly risky.
Well, for sure. It's high risk. No doubt about that.
Yeah.
But when you consider the amount of debt that she was in, based on what you found in your research,
Right.
it's not completely impossible. Plus, think about it. Have you ever known someone who could plan something perfectly and have it go exactly according to plan? Exactly. It's very rare. So, is it possible that maybe Joshua's death, while completely tragic, was an unintended consequence of whatever she was trying to do?
That things maybe got out of hand.
It's possible, and it would explain a lot of those inconsistencies that we've been talking about. Like the fact that the intruder didn't seem to have a clear plan, that there doesn't seem to be a logical reason why Joshua was killed, her own contradictory statements.
Right.
It kind of points to this idea that somebody was trying to control everything, but it just spiraled.
Okay. But if that's the case, then who was the intruder? And why would they agree to be a part of something like that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we don't have a clear answer to that. But you bring up a really interesting point about Shawn Mandell. His story changes. His work van was seen near Nathan's house, and he actually financially benefited from Joshua's death.
Yeah, those are pretty big coincidences.
They are pretty big coincidences. We have to be careful.
Right.
Because we're talking about very serious accusations here.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
We're not trying to accuse anybody of anything.
Exactly. It's really important for everyone to remember that this is about exploring different possibilities, being critical thinkers, and understanding that there are things that we just don't know.
This whole case really shows how hard it can be to figure out the truth.
Oh, it really does.
Yeah.
Especially when it seems like there are people who want to keep things hidden.
It makes you wonder how many other cases are out there just like this.
Exactly.
So where does that leave us? I mean, we have more questions than answers.
It seems like we always do.
We always do. If Nathan Medina is innocent like he says, then who killed Joshua Rhoads? And will they ever be held accountable?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, we've gone through a lot in this deep dive. We've talked about the inconsistencies in the official story. We've looked at different motives, and we've explored alternative explanations for what happened. But at the end of the day, it's up to each of you listening to decide what you believe.
We've tried to give you all the information that we have from our deep dive.
All the different perspectives.
Yeah, so that you can make up your own mind. Was Nathan Medina wrongfully convicted, or is he guilty?
What do you think really happened?
Let us know.